We're just going to give it 1 or 2 more moments just to let a few more people join.
And where's your face?
It's hidden. It's hidden for a moment. It shall return.
Okay.
Welcome to ARMA International's webinar, Making the Business Case for IG. Today's webinar is sponsored by the great folks at Nexea. I am Ann Snyder, Manager of Content Development at ARMA International, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar. For those of you who have obtained your IGP, the Information Governance Professional Certification, today's webinar counts toward 1 continuing education credit in the information management category. If you have a question during today's webinar, feel free to ask in the Q&A box. We're unlikely to get to all questions, but we'll respond to any remaining questions received after the webinar has concluded. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items I need to take care of. First up is professional membership. If you haven't checked out your ARMA membership benefits lately, we are excited to offer online and virtual opportunities to connect and get resourced through your membership. If you aren't an ARMA professional member, as you can see, there are a great number of resources to take advantage of, and it's an affordable way to get resourced as an information professional. For more information about ARMA membership and getting started, check out our website at arma.org. ARMA has extended RIM month savings from April through the end of May to celebrate 25 years of RIM this month and to support your continuing education needs during this unique time. ARMA International is offering a wealth of complimentary and discounted resources to boost your skills and credentials to help better serve your organizations. 25 years is our silver anniversary of RIM month, so we're celebrating by offering you 25% off of some of our most vital resources. InfoCon 2020 is scheduled for October 26th through the 28th, 2020 in Detroit, Michigan. Join us for the profession's premier annual event. Visit ARMA's website for additional details on education tracks and our no-risk registration policy addressing options for refunds and adjustments for event cancellation and postponements, as well as alternative scenarios. Discounted rates have been extended to May 31st, so register now for the lowest rates possible. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. We are absolutely thrilled with the speaker lineup that we have for you today. First up, we're joined today by Ann Gore. She is a legal technology consultant and advisor, information governance strategist, subject matter expert, and avid technology evangelist. She has over 25 years of experience and often serves as a champion of change for small and medium-sized law firms and corporate legal departments. Michelle Kirk is the Director of Information Governance and Chief Privacy Officer at Georgia Pacific. She has 20 years of experience in ECM, RIM, and IG, specializing in IG strategy and risk mitigation around electronic information. She is currently on the Board of Directors at ARMA International. Rudy Moliere is the Director of Information Governance at Morgan, Lewis & Bockius, LLP. With over 25 years of experience, Rudy is a founding steering committee member of the Law Firm Information Governance Symposium. And last but not least, JD Cillian. JD is the CEO of Nexea, our sponsor for today's webinar. He is an information governance strategist and innovator. He's a veteran technology executive who's managed successful companies in the information lifecycle management space as both the CEO and CSO. JD brings impassioned leadership and deep experience to Nexea. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today.
Thank
Thank you for inviting us.
So ARMA is incredibly thankful for the financial support that makes programming like this possible when choosing business partners and solutions for your information programs. We hope that you'll give extra consideration to the solution providers who continue to invest in you, supporters and providers like Nexea. So today we're going to be talking about making the business case for IG, and whether you're executing a specific IG project, building a company-wide IG program, or more likely than not doing some combination of those things concurrently, at some point you're going to need to make the case for IG. in simple terms, this is the moment where you try to convince other stakeholders that your IG-related proposal is the right solution and that the proposed efforts are worth the time, energy, and resources necessary for their implementation. If you fail to do this, even an important initiative can be dead in the water. But much more goes into making a successful business case than just that pitch or presenting facts and figures like your ROI to a chief executive. That part we're covering on this slide here with the term evangelism. To make a business case, to make it successful, you have to lay a solid foundation for that case. And that starts first with discovery. And by that we mean understanding the challenge that you're trying to address, as well as the context in which it exists. Analysis, and that's evaluation of the potential solutions, weighing pros and cons, for example, and ultimately selecting what path you're going to take forward. Presentation, that's putting what you've learned from discovery and analysis into an appropriate format for sharing, and then eventually getting to that next step, which we think of traditionally as making the business case, evangelism. And though we've represented these here linearly, and there's certainly a linearity to this, discovery of some nature has to happen before you can analyze anything. These steps are iterative and will almost certainly be refined and will evolve over time. You know, an example that I think is fairly obvious is your understanding of the problem on day 0, day 1 is going to be different than at you know, the point where you're doing formal requirements gathering, or even when you're, say, testing and implementation of a solution. At that point, you'll have a much more solid understanding of the problem that you're trying to solve and what's necessary to make it you know, fashion a good solution for it. The other point is that each of these elements also informs the others, and I'm trying to represent that here by these little red symbols. You know, whether you you know, and that's another point. It's iterative and informs and sort of feeds back on itself. Of course, whether you're using people, processes, or technology to address your problem, or some combination of those things, your end goal ultimately is going to be implementation of your solution. But discovery, analysis, presentation, and evangelism don't stop there either. They can continue through implementation and in some cases beyond. We're going to look at each of these 4 elements and in turn, see how they are iterative in their process and how they inform one another, and then eventually how all of these get tied together. Before I move into discovery, does anyone on the panel have anything to add?
No, I think this will all tie together. You know, how it was when we were doing this, it was kind of difficult to try to segment it out because they all intersect, right? It kept going back. So as we were developing this, we kept saying, you have to keep going back to discovery, but you need to evangelize all the way through. So it's very difficult to say that it's a repeat, and it's an interconnect. So I think that you'll hear enough of us all the way through.
All right, anyone else with anything to add before we move to our first topic, discovery?
No.
All right, so we're talking about the need to lay a foundation for your business case, and I think it should be obvious that this begins with understanding the problem, what you're trying to understand, as well as the context. And though this, I think, seems obvious, this is actually where a lot of projects go wrong. People don't spend enough time understanding what the problem is, but you can't solution a problem if you don't understand what it is, and if you don't have some sense of the environment in which you're operating. So this first bullet point here, the challenge, that's what we're trying to do, what we're trying to fix. Why is this so important? And let me just open that up to the panel.
Well, let me take a stab at it. So as you mentioned in the introduction, I come with 20 years of compliance-driven content management, and I will bring more of the provider point of view, as well as the SMB CEO who has to had to implement some of those information governance solutions for my own organization. But in terms of the problem statement, and today, again, what we're covering during this roundtable is to be able to give all of you tools to help convince the organization at large to invest in their information government initiatives. And as mentioned below, or just before, building it and they will come, or be converted to your point of view doesn't work. So you have to build that case from really multiple angles and try to keep adjusting your story and building your supporting team within the organization till you reach that goal. So that's why it's very, very iterative. So what I want to be able to cover here briefly is I want just to focus on a few key items that, again, will be echoed throughout the roundtable. And overall, it's an industry-wide problem, and the consequences as well as the benefits are critical for your organizations. So first, some of the key data points to be able to shed some of that light on the problem. So if you look at it, everybody knows about the data growth, and everybody knows about the compliance and risk factor. But if we look at the data growth itself, we know that in the last couple of years, 90% of the data has been created. So that's the IBM studies that was done a few years ago. But now the data is doubling every single year. So data growth is very critical. In terms of compliance and risk factor, we talk a lot about the breaches, the fines, and with the increased volume, obviously there is more and more opportunities to have incidents. But it's interesting to understand where those incidents happen and why they happen, and how does that relate with your own organization. As an example, 34% of the breaches in 2019 were done by internal actors. And why? It's because they don't know where to store files. And so they're storing them in the wrong location. They don't know the importance of the sensitivity of those files, or they accidentally send those files to the wrong person, or sometimes your consultants that have access to your IT environments have access to too much information. So it's something that you need to be able to take into account. There's also some costs associated with those breach. Close to 3 billion of records have been breached in 2018, but that's not that much of that volume that is interesting. It's the cost for the impacted organization that was a massive $654 billion of cost. And it happens at all levels. Of course, within the news, you hear all about the large organizations that have breaches, the Facebooks of the world, the Marriotts, the British Airways, the Googles, the Targets, Ubers, Equifax, all of those that have seen some of those breaches with hefty sums in terms of fines, from $5 billion for Facebook to $230 million for British Airways, and the likes of Target, Uber, and Equifax with a combined $1.5 billion in settlements, so large amounts. But if you look at it, it doesn't happen just at the large organization, it also happens in the SMB world. 43% of the breaches are actually within the SMB world. And the impact is much greater. 60% of those are forced to close their doors within 6 months after a data privacy related breach due to the litigation cost and or brand damages. So that's just in terms of the problem statement within the industry. But then within the user base, you have really concrete use cases that usually from a compliance or record management team you're trying to solve to be able to limit that risk. And those are more PII identification, so know where your risky information is, or rot information elimination, so redundant, obsolete, and trivial information to be able to reduce that risk area, and then defensible dispositions to be able to eliminate what you can as soon as you can without adding too much of that litigation risk. But sometimes even those ROIs, when you explain them, the company's leadership see this more as an annoyance or something that would not impact them as drastically as others. So there are other dimensions that you can look at very briefly in terms of what's in it for me when you're looking at the people that you're trying to convince within your organization. In terms of pure cost, in terms of pure cost savings, you have studies from McKinsey and IDC that showcase the productivity impacts that not having the right information at the right time to the right people has an impact of 25 to 50% of productivity. So you need to be able to have that aspect.
So
if we could just
sorry,
go ahead.
JD, where would you say that from a general, not just from a breach perspective, but an overarching IG, where would you, how does someone begin? I think that's the overarching piece from a discovery. Like, I mean, Rudy would chime in, and like, I think that's where people want to see, where do you start and where do you go? Like, we know we have this problem. How do we present that? How do we find that information? Rudy, do you have a point?
Absolutely. Well, my background is primarily big law. So the approach that I take in terms of understanding the challenge is, and this is what I tell to other colleagues when asked that question, is to get to know the organization. form cross-functional relationships, and become intimately knowledgeable about roles and responsibilities, because the pain points will be different depending on who you reach out to and who is in the best position to help you drive your program. I look at my program is more holistic as opposed to concentrating on one particular problem or one particular project, I should say. So one approach that I have is something I call the toe in the water method, which is basically reach out to a project team, find a piece of technology that is being rolled out, let's say like an MS Teams or a collaboration site or a cloud initiative, offer to review and offer to assist by providing IG guidelines, because 9 out of 10 times IG principles aren't being discussed or even considered. And you want to make sure that the train hasn't, of course, left the station when you insert yourself in there, but otherwise you might be seen as more of a roadblock. And projects have timelines, and project managers and stakeholders are pretty fixed on their milestones, so you want to make sure you avoid that. So in terms of understanding the problem and in understanding it in a more holistic way, the way that my approach is, in getting your toe in the water, so to say, you get a chance to test the appetite for IG within your organization. Now, I'm speaking primarily to someone who is not already immersed into this and who's trying to make that business case in a place that has either been not bought in or have not really had a mature enough IG program. So to those folks out there who are listening, this is what I mentioned. I recommend doing that approach. You can be, you have to be persuasive. You have to understand the facts. You have to have the data. You have to highlight the pain points that people are already saddled with and are sort of remediating after the fact. Sort of the, had we done this at the project onset, we wouldn't have been saddled with this cleanup project. And now we're talking about, and we've been talking about fixing it for a while, and no one has the bandwidth. So the toe in the water method gives you an opportunity for a quick win and a seat at the table for future technology initiatives. I'm sorry.
And actually, so that sort of, I want to keep us moving here, so that, you know, we're talking about sort of here about identifying the challenge, understanding what our begin state is, what the problem is, and Rudy's just touched on some of those ways about reaching out, how we can reach out to people to find out what those challenges are, what their pain points are, for example, and then you know, just also understanding, you mentioned this, you know, just understanding a little bit of the context, the background. We've been dealing with this problem for a while, so why is that important? Why do we need to understand the background? And then let's move you know, a little bit into just understanding a little bit more about the context. So you've also touched on the concept of people, Rudy.
Well, it goes back to my earlier point of getting to know the organization and forming a relationship. That's how you get to know the pain points and their origin. Has this been a problem for a long time? Have they attempted to address it in the past? Let me use IT as an example. I should say some IT professionals often take the approach of addressing IG pain points by simply adding or buying more drive space or archiving, get it out of the way to improve system function. Now, that's not a knock on IT. It's just that core IG principles aren't part of their wheelhouse. The same goes with IG folks like me. I may not fully understand the back-end implications of spinning up a program that addresses my IG needs, but you have to keep the conversation going and tailoring your message specifically to the person who has a pain point that you're trying to address.
And we'll get into that point just a little bit later when we talk about sort of, you know, adjusting your elevator pitch under evangelism. But if we can transition just quickly to the idea of stakeholders and resources, taking account of the people that are part of your IG environment. Anne, can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Well, I think that's always a key point. In many different projects that I'm involved in, there's sometimes, you know, we often have these team meetings, and the firm identifies, or the corporate legal department identifies who's going to be on the team. And in some cases, it feels like it's like a sequestered unit. It's a big surprise. Like, it's just going to be these people making a decision, and they haven't necessarily reached out to all the people that I call the people that are doing the work, and they might have the requirements that they know where all the skeletons are hidden. They know how the work is done. And there's overbroad, you know, back kind of to Rudy's point, decisions are made and nobody understood that, hey, you can't take that away because there's a very specific need over here that there's a reason why they're doing this. Now, is it a good reason? Maybe, maybe not. But we need to kind of include and be more inclusive of the people that are involved in many of the decision-making processes. Not that they're going to be the final decision-making process, but back to the, this goes back to my original point. If you didn't do the discovery and you didn't include all the right stakeholders and you didn't include all the right people, you're not going to get the right discovery responses back. So you're building your toolkit and pulling it all together with invalid information, right? So I think that it's real key that we understand, what are we trying to do? And it goes back to, we're going to do a little evangelization. Some people will be very key in helping us understand what their pain points are, to Rudy's point. And others will be more to what JD's talking about. Hey, we got a problem. We don't want to be on the front page of the paper. We don't want, we want to make sure we're protected, but we have to understand the whole, universe, because we don't want to run down a path where, oh, we can't do that. We don't know how everything's interconnected. We need to know how to meet with success in a timeline. And I know we've all done projects that have failed. I mean, just failed because we didn't have all the components squared away, right? There's been something where you got to step number 90 and you found out, hey, we can't get to number 100.
I think we've all seen those instances where we've solutioned a problem. We built a solution, but it doesn't match with the problem itself.
And I think what's cool here about this discussion is that everybody involved here has been involved on different levels of organizations. Michelle's been involved in corporate legal and in a more enterprise environment, and JD's doing it from a business partner or vendor perspective, and Rudy's in a large law. So, and I'm in small to mid-size. We've all seen it from different perspectives. So the ways that you get there all might be a little bit different in the approach, but they all go back to, I call it discovery business requirements, right? I call it business requirements. And I'm usually called in when all the wheels have fallen off the wagon because somebody didn't do the business requirements in the first place, right? They came in and they sold a really great thing, and then it's not working, and somebody wants to know why we have that in our budget, right? And no one's using it. So it all goes back to doing the right thing in discovery, not we'll build it and they will come, like JD was talking about. If you didn't include the right stakeholders and you didn't get the right solution and you didn't insert yourself, like Rudy was saying, to try to get a temperature of the room, then that's kind of the key thing here.
Okay, just you did say, I think it was interesting, you pointed out the different perspectives that our panelists offer, and these are issues that we encounter in all kinds of different contexts. So what can we learn about the IG doesn't occur exactly in a vacuum. It occurs in the context of some specific organization. What do you need to know about that, and why, and what happens if you don't take some of that business context and also just even other context into account when you're considering a solution for an IG problem?
I think we need to hear from Michelle, but to me, I think you have to understand, you have to understand what the impact is when you make change and you do it in a vacuum. It never goes well. It never ends well. It's not, people don't like change in the first place. I mean, I love my job, but most people don't love seeing me walk in the door, right? Because they know there's change coming, and people don't like change. They know you're going to upset their apple cart. And some people embrace it, but most people know there's going to be a change, and usually it's for the better. And I'm going to say 90% of the time it's for the better, but that's a matter of perception. And if you don't do it right,
it can hurt.
It can hurt, right?
Right.
And like what I said,
Michelle, do you have anything to add there? Sorry.
No, I mean, I just think we need to understand when we're going to bring change. Before we introduce it, we need to understand what the goals of our business are. What is the business trying to do? Because it's not information governance, right? There's a purpose for the business. There's a vision. there's a specific culture that goes along with that, and they have different risk tolerances. We talk about that a lot at the company that I work at right now. It's what is our risk tolerance overall as an organization, not you personally. What is it overall, and what are we willing? What's going to be a worthwhile project to mitigate those risks or that risk that you're going after versus what wouldn't be perceived as worthwhile when they see that problem statement at the end. So you do that by reading emails, getting to know and building those relationships Rudy talked about, understanding what your strengths are and your style of delivery to people, and then understanding what other people's strengths are and what's in it for them, right? What are the problems they perceive, and are the problems you're trying to solve related to them? Those are really a big deal because if you do get it wrong, you run the risk of having to wait a while before you can reintroduce a solution again, right? So I think I hear a lot in business like fail fast and do experiments and that sort of thing, but I think sometimes you really have to look at the whole picture when you're doing information governance, because sometimes if you do get it wrong because you haven't understood the appetites or really the problem that you're trying to solve or what the risk profile is, you may not get a second chance for quite a while.
And just to build upon this, what Michelle just said, it depends where you are in your journey as an organization. So who, in terms of, and I don't want to jump towards the executive sponsorship, but who in your organization is actually leading the organization forward? Is that more the CLO that is implementing lots of different things to be able to modernize the approach to compliance? Is that more of a CIO or someone on the IT side that is leading the charge with changing some of the tools to be better equipped? Is that more on the CFO that is trying to modernize to be able to get better protection on his revenue and his risk factors? So depending on understanding where your company is at and who is able to support you in the best fashion, and it could be multiple people within the organization, is also going to help you frame the problem of information governance based on their KPI, based on their lens over the business.
In addition to the context of the organization that we're considering, there's other context too. So when we were preparing for this, Rudy, you gave me an example. So people think of what's going on with COVID and the pandemic as being a barrier to doing IG, but you had sort of exactly the opposite experience. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, with a holistic IG program, it helps you have many what's the expression? Many irons in the fire. So you have many projects. I always tell people to definitely have a 5-year strategy, but be prepared to spin it up in 5 weeks if needed, or 5 days.
Right.
So yes, of course, like many organizations, there were some things that were either delayed or not prioritized or pushed aside, but we also had opportunities to spin up other projects that may not have been fully mature or were at the initial stages, projects such as our e-signature or remote online notarization. It definitely punched up our digitization projects. So there were things. It's interesting to watch the journey of a project and what usually is hot at the moment and what eventually has to, because of either resources or change management issues, eventually have to sort of take a back seat to others. This this current situation provided us with the opportunity to pull other projects out and move them into the forefront. So that's why I think it's important to have many arrows in your quiver when you're dealing with a large organization and a large information governance program.
So that context gives clues to go no go on some of those projects, and that's
Exactly.
that taking advantage of it is really amazing if you can take that kind of holistic approach. Let's move on now to analysis. So we've done some basic discovery. We've understood what the problem is. We've consulted the ears on the ground, basically the people who are going to have some information about what's actually happening in our organization. So we understand where we are. Have an idea what the challenges are and where we want to go. and have some sense of what the context is. But now we move on to that analysis stage of deciding what are our options, what should we do, and start looking at potential solutions and analyzing how it fits our potential challenge. So can we talk about that? What's the process, and for example, of how you begin looking at possible solutions that fit your IG problem?
I think it's kind of different for every kind of segment. It's kind of similar, but I think it's very different because how Michelle would approach it would be completely different than how Rudy's organization, and then how people that, I'm dealing with and the organizations I'm dealing with. So like in Michelle's environment, Michelle's going to have a structure and has a process by which they follow. And same thing with Rudy, there's people with names on the doors. And then you get to clients of mine that are, 15, 20, 25, 75 attorneys. We have 2 IT people, right, to help us with, and people that aren't really, structured to make those kinds of decisions. So how each one of us would approach this for our organizations would be different. I call it the 3 Ps, people, process, and programs, but it's technology. But you really need to understand how all of those things are connected. When I give presentations, I had shown this to Anne. I usually, when I talk about this segment, I showed just a picture of, it's just 3 pictures on the same screen: Legos, Connects, and Lincoln Logs. Mm-hmm. And you look at them and they're like, okay, Anne, what does this have to do with anything in technology? And I'm like, if you have kids or you have nieces and nephews, you've stepped on them in the middle of the night, number 1. But number 2,
so it hurts, right?
Right, and they really hurt. They're almost as bad as Barbie shoes. But they hurt. But what you will find is that in each one of those, with Legos and with Connects and with Lincoln Logs, you can build some pretty cool structures. But what you can't do is interconnect those. So I can't connect Legos to Lincoln Logs, and I can't connect Connects to Legos, right? They're just separate entities. They're little silos, and many of our organizations have silos, and people have run off, whether they're silos because they've built different little kingdoms, like in an enterprise environment, and they have a SharePoint environment, and they have a iManage environment, and they have, a cloud environment. They have 29 places they're storing data, or whether it's because they've shot from the hip and somebody needs this application and they run out and buy this application and implement it, but none of the pieces fit, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what we need to do is make sure that people understand what I call the long and the short view. Mm-hmm. Having a 3 to 5 year plan is nice, but know that it's turning on a dime, right? It mm-hmm. never, what you thought you wanted in 5 years, go back and look at that, right? Because it probably didn't end up happening, or it came out with a completely different view. So it's having a plan and knowing that, hey, someone down the hall is thinking they want to do this, and say, whoa, where does this fit in our plan? Mm-hmm. Like, don't go running off like guns a-blazing to figure out that you need this. It's not going to fit. It's a Lego and it doesn't fit into the Connect. So let's figure out how we can make that work. So in my view, you need to understand the people, the process. So we've already understanding the people, right? You've brought them to the table. You haven't excluded everybody, because mm-hmm. in my worlds, we don't have as many people. And the talk around the office cooler, well, I don't know if we're ever going back to the office cooler, but the talk about the office cooler is, I'm involved on a committee that you're not involved in, and I think it's just easier for me to tell everybody that we're, the British are coming, and let everybody be involved. But I think that we just really do need to have a way that, we look at the dollars, we look at what people need, we bring in multiple choices, we bring in multiple vendors / business partners. They're based on the requirements, mm-hmm. not based on who's the guy next door has. It's based on what does the organization need, not what, because I always say, do I hire, somebody will say, oh, I used XYZ as my software. Well, that's great, but use the same analogy as a house. Would I use the same contractor that Anne used to build my house, to build my bathroom, to do bathroom renovations, as Anne used to build the deck? No. They have different skill sets. So you need to make sure you've got the right people. You need to make sure you've got the right vendors involved. You need to make sure you've got the right outcome that fit the requirements that you did during discovery, because the flashy new, shiny new penny, the shiny new object, that's what one of my colleagues calls it, the shiny new object syndrome. The shiny new object syndrome doesn't ever meet with success. It's just a shiny new object. It's just a shiny new object.
And just, you talked about sort of the how this fits in the long and short-term view. So that's one element, is how does this fit within your environment, and again in the long-term plan for the organization. What are some other pros and cons that people think about? So there are both quantifiable ones and non-quantifiable pros and cons that you think about when you're evaluating a solution. And I think this is where some of the the more traditional making the case for IG comes in, the ROI, total cost of ownership, those kinds of things, the dollars and cents that go with this.
Well, I mean, there's a number of things that go into it. One is you have to, no matter what industry you're in, compliance comes into it, right? Like regulatory compliance. So no matter what your vertical is, you have to make sure that the risk and the compliance are playing a major component in that, because there isn't a single industry out there that isn't getting dinged on that. So you have to make sure that is part of your game plan. Efficiency, are you going to really get the efficiency? Are you going to get what you're looking for? I challenge anyone that does, we all do this work on the return on investment. I challenge anybody that did those return on investments to see if they went back and saw if they made it. Because we do all that work to make sure that we're going to get the ROI, but I want to know who went back 2 years later to see did we meet that, because I don't think that happens all the time.
And some of those seem like some rough guesses sometimes, but I think sometimes that's maybe enough. Do you think that's enough sometimes, just to say it's going to be bad if you do this?
And sometimes it's just, we have nothing, so doing something is better than nothing. Sometimes it's baby steps. What I find is that when you have so many things that you need to get done, it's it's a huge elephant that you're trying to eat all at once. And it's what is the best pathway forward for you to hit that goal without feeling like you're in project fatigue, right? Because that's a very real thing that will happen. I mean, Rudy's been there, and we've all been there. That they've got everything they need, and you can't do it all in one fell swoop. You have to come up with a way to get there from point A to point B, and sometimes you have to do A, then D, then F, then K, then C, right? There isn't, that's the only way it's going to work, because of the people involved and the projects involved and the timelines involved and the dollars involved. You can't be stuck on a very linear, okay, we're going to do A and then we're going to do B, then we're going to, because inevitably something goes terribly wrong, and you only get X number of dollars in your budget, or you only have, you have a deadline, like how many people met deadlines, the project delayed, and now you've got a Microsoft deadline looming, or you've got an end of life for some other project. So, I mean, those all come into play when you're planning your projects. Is how long did you wait to make that decision?
And someone asked the question about, soft ROI versus hard ROI. And so one that is often overlooked, because there is a perception that, storage costs have gone much lower than they were in the past, which is true, but they've reduced, they've not reduced in the same proportion as the volume of data that is being created. So right now, as I said earlier, companies that are actually almost doubling their footprint from a data creation standpoint on a yearly basis, while storage cost is going down by a few points every single year. And if you look at it from a cost perspective, so if you have a fairly large IT environment, go and check with your IT the level of data that they are managing, because if you look at it in terms of petabyte, it costs in between $10 and $15 million per year per petabyte of data that is being managed, which is significant. So in terms of ROI and concrete ROI. And on top of this, you have studies from IBM and Veritas that show that north of 75% of the data within an organization is either obsolete, redundant, or trivial, and is not critical to the way the business is run. So you have large amount of savings still within the data storage that can allow you to be able to get some traction.
I just in the interest of time, thank you so much, JD. Just want to move on to the last point in here, the evaluation and selection of your solution. So you're considering solutions, looking at the pros and cons. Michelle, can you talk to us a little bit about the process that takes place in a corporate setting for doing that evaluation and selection? That's a context where it might be a little bit more formalized than at some smaller organizations.
Yeah, at large companies that I've worked for, it kind of runs a gamut, but usually they have some sort of format that you have to fit, right? You think of all your requirements during your discovery and put weighting to them, and then when you look at different solutions, you give scores and you figure things out that way. When you present, do you need to present that scoring? Do you even need to do the scoring at all? I've worked for companies where you had to fill out a big form to explain what the costs would be over a 5-year period and what you perceive the ROI to be. My company right now doesn't have that, but they do have a pretty good, it's still a format, right? It's what problem are you trying to solve? Why do we need this? What are the things you've looked at? What are the 3 options we have, and what's the general cost of those? And why do you recommend a specific way to move forward with this project? Why would I tell you go with that? But I like that. You know, I like that. I feel like any problem that you're trying to solve, you should know what it is, what the background is on it, and what the options are. Do nothing, do something, do a little bit of something, you know, and what's that going to cost you? And that allows anybody to understand it, and it actually allows you to articulate it a little bit better too. Once you've got those things in your mind, it enables you to talk about that to other people in the company and tell them why they should care about the problem too.
And I think, Michelle, I think that leads into our next topic, which is the presentation. It's that moment where you're translating the things that you've learned in discovery and your analysis phase into a format where you can share it in an appropriate way with your audience. And so we were talking a little bit about this more formal process, but, in some instances that can be, something simple, like just even formatting, just formulating the issue, the problem statement in an email for your first conversations. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the past when I've talked about this to people, what I do is, even if you start out with a deck that addresses those main things, you can have that deck and sort of take things from it so that yourself, you know that your messaging is consistent and you're talking to the same point all the time, regardless of who your audience is. You can just have an informal email, but you're using the same words, or you're changing some of the terminology depending on who the audience is. Maybe my CFO thinks about costs and what we're gaining more so than my CISO does, for instance. He's thinking about something totally different, what this means to him, and I'd use different language for that. But I feel like it's really important to get that stuff straight in your mind so that when you are presenting it, you're doing a consistent message and giving other people words so they can use that same consistent message if they're talking on your behalf.
So it's same messaging, but just adjusted, tweaked for each of the audiences, basically. I think that's a common problem I've seen people attempting to try to fit the same pitch into the a square peg into a round hole each time without making that kind of adjustment for the audience. Does anyone else have anything to add on that point about the presentation and again how it gets adjusted to fit the audience?
I can speak to that. And to Michelle's point, that's a great point there. But I would say sometimes it's really not even changing the wording, but changing the priorities on that presentation or that elevator pitch. As people have often asked me, so what is your elevator pitch for IG? I say, well, it depends on who's in the elevator and how high we're going. So if it's my COO, I will definitely lean on a lot of cost-saving benefits. If it's my general counsel, I'm leaning heavily on risk. And if we happen to be going on a high floor, maybe they'll get the entire pitch, but I'll definitely want to get in what's most important to them in there early. So in terms of adjusting your presentation and adjusting your socialization of the project, I would say, to Michelle's point, very, very important to understand who your audience is and to tailor it to that person's bailiwick.
So we have another point here that don't reinvent the wheel. So Michelle's talking about sort of formalized processes that might exist in your company if you have a preferred format for either your organization or a functional area within or even maybe a specific person likes to see something in a particular format, you might tailor your presentation to that person. But what do you do when you don't have something there? So you don't want to reinvent the wheel, but what do you do when there is no wheel to start with?
Well, in my case, like the majority of my firms don't have they don't have a CISO, they don't have, they've got an IT person, they've maybe got a champion who's a managing partner or an executive director who's trying to run a project. And so I try to give them what I know, but I also try to say, let's take what we know. Let's go back to the vendors that we're working with, the business partners that we're working with, and try to find how they can also help you. Mm-hmm. Where are the statistics that they have? I mean, they have departments that have marketing things that you can utilize. Would they be willing to share some of that data? And that's one thing. So don't reinvent there. And the other thing is when you're preparing your presentations, when you need to give those pitches, it's, even though you're a valued member of the team and you are an expert in some in your arena, they don't want to know that it's just you saying so. They want to have supporting statistics, right? So my suggestion would be, if you're spinning up something to handle breaches and security, then go back to that. Go back and find statistics that have to come from the FBI, or go back and get statistics from any one of the firms that that are in that space that can help you with national statistics. Whether it's IAPP, or whether it's an ILTA survey, or whether it's an ARMA survey, or whether it's a coming from the FBI, whatever those statistics are that show what other people have done or what the risks are, so that it's not just Ann Gore saying it, or not just JD saying it, that there's facts supporting that this is what other people are doing. And I think when you see those kinds of numbers in front of you that are not related to you, that they're related to the world, it's much more powerful than that. Then they can see what everybody else is seeing. So, don't reinvent the wheel means somebody else has done this. Don't go thinking that you have to go figure out all those things. But I also say don't do death by PowerPoint either, right? They want you to know your stuff so that you're not reading a PowerPoint deck. If you, like in my cases, if we're sitting in front of the management team and we might be told we're getting 20 minutes, and all of a sudden they say 10, you better be ready with that elevator pitch to be pared down, because as Rudy said, they're not getting off on the 20th floor now, they're getting off on the 10th.
Yeah,
so
and I have great examples of that. Yeah, I have great examples of that. A past company that I worked for, the whole thing was you get one slide, and you better be able to talk to that slide and choose what you put on there very wisely. My company right now, they're very big on pre-reads. So you might get 3 slides, and you can put extra material there, but they're only going to read the 3, and you get your 10 or 20 minutes to pitch those 3 slides. So knowing that culture is really important, and you find that out by talking to your peers, finding out how they got things sold, or what's the main approach, or can you share with me what your slides look like for your completely unrelated project?
Just in keeping with that theme, we have to get off at an earlier floor than anticipated and have to move to the next slide. So we're on to evangelism, sort of the sort of piecing of all of these elements together into that finally that moment where you're making the pitch. The first point here is the need for an executive sponsor. I think we all know the importance of that, but another, beyond just getting that executive sponsor who could be a champion for the project and resourcing and budget, we also have to build a broader base support for IG. Does anyone want to speak to that briefly?
Well, I mentioned this earlier in terms of the executive support, depending on where your organization is at in its own journey, and who has the biggest voice potentially, or the biggest traction that you want to be able to enjoy and take advantage of. So it's very important to have some executive level support, but you don't necessarily need to have only one. IG is one of those very, very cross-functional initiatives that can have a positive impact across multiple divisions. So that they are, again, as we mentioned, the chief financial officer, the chief legal officer, the internal audit team, the IT team, even on the revenue side, you can have some tremendous impact. So being able to see who you want to be able to have within your portfolio of supporters is very key, and especially avoiding the people that you do not want to have, because if they have a big voice, they might actually not be looked at very positively within the rest of the organization. Because the way you want to use your executive sponsor is to be able to remove those roadblocks within the organization, turf wars that are going to open in terms of resourcing, in terms of budget, because again, it is an extremely cross-functional initiative. So that's where I would focus on, is really figuring out who has the wind in their sail that you can actually grab on and tailor that story to that specific executive talk. So because
but beyond that executive, what about ground level support for IG? And then we're going to have to just wrap this slide and move on to just a quick message from Nixea and then open it up for questions.
I often have when an initiative is getting started, both on the discovery phase and on the information gathering and all that information, I have kickoff meetings on all projects, and I invite everyone, including the crankiest person, because the crankiest person will be the worst person when it comes to implementation, right? If you didn't include them and they were excluded from the birthday party, they're going to be angry. So get them involved early and often, because they will now become more on your champion side. They will say, I wasn't excluded, and not sit there with the body language showing they're not going to participate. So we want everyone to adopt it, and we want everyone to understand that change. We want everyone to be part of that team of what I call champions of change. So, it isn't fun to be left out on the outside. If you're not the cool kid, it's not fun to find out that your life's going to change and no one's really told you about it. So I think it's just easier to kind of say, the British are coming, and not just say, hey, the British are here, right? Right. I think it's just a much nicer thing. Rudy?
Yeah, I was going to say that the Law Firm Information Governance Symposium, although this is primarily geared towards law firms, but I think it applies across the board, they promote in their first report of several years ago, the establishment of the Information Governance Advisory Board. So members of various different functional units that can serve as not only people that you can get information from, but also as IG disciples to their own functional groups, and to go and help you evangelize in their specific language, which also is very, very helpful. So if there is an appetite for that, because I know there are a lot of committees in a lot of organizations, and everyone loves to be part of a committee, but if that's something you want to consider, I think that is a very, very good way to approach it. I mean, you can have folks from the admin management, from business intelligence, from your ethical and legal compliance, from corporate to legal innovation and KM. So all those folks, they do spin up programs, and they do have a megaphone to their particular constituents. And if you can get at least one person, a credible person from each one of these functional units to be your IG disciple and to be part of this advisory board, I think it might go a long way in you spreading your message and getting even the crankiest people on board, because at least they're hearing it from their own folks.
Okay, just in interest of just keeping this moving, we're really running out of time here. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. We've Rudy has previously talked about elevator pitch, and we've talked about the need. A couple of people have raised a point of the need to adjust your pitch for your audience. So that's the point of that bullet. And utilizing trusted partners. And Gora had been talking about using statistics. A good source of those is probably your partners. Your business partners are making this kind of pitch on a routine basis, and rather than reinvent the wheel, you can sometimes reach out to them as a potential resource for that kind of information. And of course, communicate. Evangelism doesn't stop at the end of your IG implementation. It goes beyond that as you make sure people are actually using the solutions that you provided. We're going to just now turn quickly for just a JD, you have to keep this really short so we can open it up for some Q&A. Sorry about that. To JD to tell us just a little bit about Nixea.
Yeah, no, very briefly, because I'm not here to sell Nixea. Just we're an information governance software provider, helping organizations answer the use cases that we've mentioned earlier, from PII identification, rot elimination, defensible disposition, data subject access request in terms of GDPR management. So our approach is really to manage in place so that you don't have to centralize your information, but you actually overlay this governance without burdening the end user. So it's also a different approach than some of the others. Nixea is our new name, but we've been around the block for the last 30 years in the content management space. And the last slide is really just check out our various resources that we have on our website. We really strive to put a lot of educational content out to help drive the industry forward. Just check it out. And if you don't do it yet, I invite you also to follow us on LinkedIn as well, because we publish a lot of content there as well.
Okay, now let's move to questions. Let's just open it up with one. So what are some good sources for IG statistics if you're making your case for IG? We touched a little bit on these.
Well, one of the things that I would say is, depending on who your vertical is, like, so if you're in financial and and you need to go, like in New York, it would be the New York Department of Financial Services. You want to go look and get what the statistics are from your vertical industry. Who's the overseer of your industry? If it's, and again, I focus more on legal, so I would go, if I want to see what my other law firms and other corporate legal departments are doing, I would look to ILTR, I would look to CLOC, or I would look to ALT, or I would look to the local bar associations or the national bar associations. It depends on what your project is. So you're gonna look to some of those statistics, look to them for see what kinds of statistics they're producing. But particularly, like if you're in pharmaceutical, you're gonna want to turn to them. If you're in whatever those industries are, you're going to want to turn to those industries and see what they've published.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question here. How would you suggest communicating to sort of a person who is a roadblock to IG, to make that person, to convert them into being, instead of a roadblock, a road builder? How do you change their perception? How would you change someone's perception on the value of IG?
That's a whole thing.
Right.
In fact, I would use a book that Ann Snyder recommended to me about 5 years ago that she probably doesn't even remember, called Getting to Yes. And it's a lot about looking at someone else's position and understanding what's in it for them, and looking at your interactions with them very analytically, thinking, why are they a roadblock? Why don't they see the value in that? And really being strategic about your interactions and your messaging with them. I don't think it always works. Sometimes someone's always going to be a roadblock, and that's just how it's going to be. But I think there are strategies that you can use in terms of communicating your position and things that are good for your organization to those kinds of people.
But I echo what Ann Gore said earlier. If they are cranky, and they might remain cranky, that's fine, but you don't want them to remain a roadblock. If they move just to neutral, is already much better than staying as a roadblock. So they might not become a road builder, but at least if you can put them in the camp of I'm neutral because I'm aware it's not necessarily going to impact me too negatively, so I have other things to be cranky about, and I will focus my energy there versus focusing my crankiness on that specific project.
I find that when you approach them on a person, I mean, I've got a vibrant personality, right? So to me, that's a challenge. Like when I've got that person, so to me, it's like, I'm going to find out why they're cranky. I want to try to change, and it's not change that person, but I want to find out what's causing that. Is it and why they're a roadblock? And, sometimes people are just cranky. I can't fix that. but maybe there's a whole bunch of other things going on, and maybe their job has been made infinitely so difficult the last time we did something and no one held their hand, that they look at this new project to say, oh my God, the last time it was a disaster for me, and now I've got more responsibility, less help, it's going to be a triple disaster. If we can figure out let's figure out why they feel that way, and and maybe focus a little bit more, do a little more stroking, a little more hand holding, a little more, hi, how you doing? Maybe find out something about them on a personal level. I find that when you ask, how was the soccer game? Where's your daughter going to college? When you start engaging those kinds of people, I engage everybody on all levels. When they become personally involved and you become personally involved, you now don't look like that mean person that's coming to upend their life. And they tend to be your ally. So like to what JD said, I don't need them to be on the negative. I don't need them to be going in reverse, but at least if I can get them in neutral, they're not going to be my roadblock anymore.
And some of that, I think also, it requires you to have some introspection about yourself to know whether you're good at those kinds of interpersonal skills and whether you're not, and just really working. And what I'm hearing for success and how you turn people has a lot to do with those, basic interpersonal skills. And not all of us are natural introverts, extroverts like Ann Gore. And so it's you need to understand that about yourself, and then work on changing that, or working with other people within your team who can help you build those relationships. We have another question here. What tools and mechanisms have you used in the past to quantify risk tolerance in an organization? And we'll just take that as the last question, and then we can stay on if people have the ability to, or wrap it up.
I know in my company, and it's because it's big, we have a risk management framework. So that's made very easy for me. I wouldn't say it's easy to do, but at least I have a template for that.
I rely heavily on data analytics to show where we're excelling, and where we have a little bit more work to do. So if you have access to data scientists in your organization or in your team, I rely heavily on data, even for dealing with the cranky person, because sometimes those cranky people are also very competitive. So never underestimate the power of shaming and showing where they stand.
Did you say shaming?
Yes. It works. KPIs work every time.
Exactly. In terms of where they stand in relative to their other colleagues.
And the other thing that I like to do is that works well with that is to take the latest security audit, or take the latest thing that's been passed by your desk. That when you take the security audit and say where you can and can't survive, that's a great driver for saying why you have to move forward. Like, we can't answer that question on an affirmative basis, or we've been saying we're working towards that for 3 years and we still aren't there. So, when I hand that in and they say, why do we have to do this? Well, do you like that client? Because you might not have them tomorrow, right? So I tend to use security audits or things that are gonna, or turn the table and say, here, this regulatory group is telling us we have to. So it isn't I might do it, or I might like to do it, or I'm trying to make your life miserable. That's a fine. That's dollars. So I tend to use those kinds of things, because again, then it takes the personal aspect out of it. It's, they said so. Here are the things we got to do.
Yeah, and even if you don't have a formal like audit program or risk management program, I've found that having like an easy, simple kind of assessment set up so that departments can do that for themselves or whatever, and that gives you something to measure. And if you get everybody on board to do it, of course you have to sell that idea first. It gives you a really good place to make those arguments, to say that department's not doing that. Is that important to us? Because if it is, we need to realize half of our people aren't doing it, or and so on.
If I may, and just one final thought, because we've talked a lot about the compliance and the cost and the risks, and I want to just put one positive impact here in terms of revenue, because there was a report from Ernst & Young that evaluates the impact of what they call the net trust score, and it outlines the positive correlation between trust and financial performance of the company. And in other words, it means that companies that value good information governance and data privacy protection and promote this also widely perform better than their counterparts who do not. So just in terms of IG, I thought it was a positive way to end up.
That's great. I want to, I need to wrap this up. We're a little bit over time already. I would like to first thank all of our panelists. Today's webinars, it's an honor to have gotten to work with you, and thank you so much for your time and effort in this. I just want to let everyone know there are some topics that we had to pass over quickly because we got into some great conversations. There will be a white paper associated with this webinar on making the case for IG, and we'll dig into some of those topics deeper in that. I would like to thank all of our panelists for continuing to serve this community and sharing your knowledge today. Our next webinar is going to be announced soon, so keep your eyes open in your email inbox. Before we close, I'd like to remind you to become an ARMA professional member. Take time to invest in yourself. And again, I'd like to say thank you to Nexea for giving the time and money to sponsoring programs like today's webinar and supporting us at ARMA International and all of our members. So thank you everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.